Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe and keep watching more details. American Pickers Mike Wolfe spends $25,000 on rare Vespas. American Pickers star Mike Wolfe loves finding a good deal on some classic antiques. While a lot of fans think that Mike and his team have been lowballing sellers lately, there are cases where Mike pays what something is worth to him. That happened in a recent clip where he found a pair of classic Vespas. Here is what you need to know about Wolfe's latest purchase. Mike Wolfe buys two classic Vespas. In a recent American Pickers clip, Mike Wolfe, 60, was visiting a man known as the godfather of Vespa. Mike was talking to Victor Vespa, and the collector took him to see two vintage Vespas. Victor used to own one of the biggest Vespa shops and still collects the mopeds. As far as I'm concerned, Victor Vespa is like the godfather of Vespa. The guy's a pioneer. He's a legend, Mike said in the clip. After arriving, Victor took Mike to his Vespa junkyard, which was full of 70 rusty Vestas. He said this was where he found parts for fixing up other Vespas, since you couldn't order parts for them in the 80s and 90s. Victor said each of the carcasses is worth about $75 each. Mike then asked if he had any complete scooters on the property. That is when he headed into the workshop, and Mike saw two vintage models that really caught his attention. These two models were a 1952 Ferro Basso Vespa and a very, very rare 1948 model. The latter model had its original paint and toolkit. Mike said this model is rare in its home country of Italy, much less in the United States. Victor said he owned it since 1994 and was fond of it. American Pickers fans react to Mike Wolfe's purchase. Mike wanted the Vespas and asked how much it would cost to buy it from him. Victor said he would sell it for $20,000, which he said was a fair number. Mike agreed, and he had no intention of lowballing Victor. Instead, he made a counter-offer to buy the 1948 and 1952 models for $25,000. Victor's wife told him to take the deal and lighten the load. Once Victor agreed, Mike was more than happy, saying, "Oh my gosh, I love it. I absolutely love it. Love it. Love it." On a crisp autumn morning, Mike Wolfe, co-host of American Pickers, felt the thrill of a promising lead as he rolled up to an old, sprawling farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. Rumors had led him to this forgotten barn where vintage relics, motorbike parts, and dust-covered memories of the 20th century had gathered, seemingly waiting for a chance to tell their story. But today the prize wasn't just another well-worn Harley or a battered sign from a forgotten diner. It was a pair of rare Vespas from the 1950s, untouched and stored for decades, and he was ready to spend whatever it took to claim them. The barn's owner, a retired mechanic named Gus, had a reputation for his vast collection of motorbikes and a hard-to-crack poker face when it came to negotiations. As Mike and his brother Robbie exited their van, Gus leaned against the barn door, eyes glinting with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. So Gus started, arms crossed. "You're here for the Vespas, I suppose." Mike's face broke into a wide grin. "You bet I am. Word travels fast in these parts, you know. Once I heard you had not one but two of these beauties, I knew I had to make the trip out here myself." With a smirk, Gus waved the brothers inside. The barn smelled of old leather, gasoline, and rust, a scent that Mike and Robbie Wolfe had grown to love. Nestled under a thin tarp, hidden among stacks of forgotten equipment, were two glistening treasures, a 1955 Vespa 150 GS and a 1957 Vespa 125, both in pristine condition. Though the paint was faded and the tires were flat, their iconic, retro frames were unmistakable. Mike's heart raced as he pulled the tarp back, his fingers brushing against the handlebars with reverence. "These Vespas, they are in incredible shape," Mike whispered, awed by the time capsule he just uncovered. "It's like stepping back in time. Vespa revolutionized the scooter world, you know. They were more than just scooters, they were a lifestyle statement. The 150 GS here. This was the Ferrari of scooters back in the day." Robbie, standing nearby, nodded in agreement. He could sense his brother's excitement, but he also knew that Mike's heart sometimes led him to outrageous deals. Collecting these rare Vespas would be a worthwhile addition to their collection, but it wouldn't come cheap. Look, Gus said, sizing up the situation. I know what these mean to collectors like you. I spent years tinkering with these and I've kept them in shape, but it's time to part ways. Mike straightened up, sensing the negotiation beginning. They're beautiful pieces, Gus. I know these aren't easy to find in such original condition. You're sitting on gold here. Oh, I know what I got, Gus said, nodding, and I know a guy like you would pay top dollar for it. So let's cut to the chase. I want $25,000 for both. The air grew tense as the brothers exchanged a glance. It was a hefty price, but Mike knew the value of these Vespas, and he also knew how rare it was to find them in such original condition. Restoring vintage Vespas had become a passion for collectors worldwide, and a single pristine Vespa could fetch a small fortune. $25,000, huh? Mike said, pretending to mull it over as he circled the scooters, admiring their craftsmanship. He gently touched the worn leather seats, picturing their former lives buzzing down Italian streets. You've kept these beauties in mint condition, but they've still got some wear on them. What do you say we meet halfway? Gus chuckled, shaking his head. No deal, Mike. I know you folks on American Pickers love a good bargain, but this is my bottom line. These Vespas mean a lot to me, and if they're going to leave my barn, I need to know it's worth my while. Mike took a deep breath. He had been in this position countless times, faced with a seller who knew the true value of what they had. This was more than just a pair of vintage Vespas. It was history, culture, and a once-in-a-lifetime find. He glanced back at Robbie, who gave him a silent nod of approval. All right, Gus, Mike said, extending his hand. You've got yourself a deal. $25,000. Gus's stern expression melted into a smile as he shook Mike's hand. I knew you'd come around, Wolfe. These Vespas deserve a home with someone who understands their story. As they finalized the paperwork and loaded the scooters into their van, Mike couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. He and Robbie had added a new chapter to their collection, a piece of Italian design, of 1950s glamour, of an era when owning a Vespa meant freedom and style. He imagined the Vespas restored to their original luster, gleaming under the sun as they zipped down a vintage road. Back on the road, Robbie glanced over at Mike with a raised eyebrow. You know, $25,000 for a couple of scooters. You better have a plan to make that back. Mike laughed, his eyes still gleaming with excitement. Oh, I do, brother. You can't put a price on history, and these Vespas, they're going to be the centerpiece of our collection. Just imagine. They'll draw collectors from everywhere. The thrill of the pick had been worth every penny, but Mike knew he wasn't done yet. Restoration awaited, but that was just another part of the adventure. He could already picture himself sharing the Vespa's story on American Pickers, telling viewers about their Italian origins, the craftsmanship, and the boldness of 1950s culture embodied in those elegant, timeless frames. Days later, back in his shop, Mike watched as his team carefully began the restoration. Every detail was attended to with a loving touch, from the buffing of the frames to the delicate stitching on the leather seats. His mind swirled with the potential these Vespas held, knowing they would not just be museum pieces but living, breathing reminders of an era long past. And when they were finally restored, glistening under the shop lights, Mike stood back to admire the pair. The Vespas had reclaimed their former glory, transformed from dust-covered relics into symbols of freedom and style once more. In that moment, he knew they were worth every dollar, every mile traveled, and every negotiation that had led him here. These weren't just scooters. They were a piece of history and now a part of the Wolfe brothers' legacy.